Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. This video is a follow-up to the samurai camping video. If you haven't seen the samurai camping video, you should watch that video first and then come back to this video. This video is going to focus on the following. We're going to look at the war curtains again, and we're going to look at the Kamakura Sagyo again. Now in terms of the war curtains, we're going to look at examples from the Gunpo Jiyoshu, which showcases Ogasawara styled curtains. Now, the Ogasawara family is a Seiwa Genji family, and it has had a history of being involved in war and politics. For a long time. It's got a long history being involved in warfare and politics. Various branches of the Ogasawara exist, so it's difficult to speak for the Ogasawara or about the Ogasawara without having to get into more details than this video will actually cover. As I said, they've been a military presence for a while. They are Genji based, but they're not Tada Genji. But this actually provides for a good compare and contrast, for good compare and contrasting moments. Now I will also say that, as I mentioned in a previous video, there is a document it's a Genji document, but it's associated with the House of Oe, so the Oe Genji, and it also sort of overlaps with Tada Genji, called Kinitsushu. Now that document, if you remember me saying, there's the original document, which is very difficult to find. The original seems to be kind of lost to history. Now I say that tentatively because there are some texts which are contenders for potentially being the original. But what we can say for certain is that there was an original Kinitsushu, but as it spread among the Genji, it seemed like the different branches kind of made their own version. The Ogasawara absolutely got the Kinitsushu, but they edited it and changed it, and they produced their own Ogasawara Kinitsushu. So what's interesting is a lot of people who get into research of the Kinitsushu usually run into their version. But it's very easy to know that you're looking at the Ogasawara version of a Kinitsushu because all the crest used in the documents is the Ogasawara crest, and that's kind of a dead giveaway that you're looking at their version. But the point being is the Ogasawara are definitely a reservoir for Genji tradition and Genji tactics. Even though in their history, well, I wouldn't say even though. During the northern and southern wars, some of them sided with the southern court, and some of them sided with the Ashikaga. But now the Ashikaga, they were technically Seiwa. They're Genjis. They're technically Seiwa Genji too. So, the point being is that, like I said, the Ogasawara are a great reservoir of Genji techniques and tactics. Now that doesn't mean that their techniques are going to match the Tada Genji, because Tada Genji is one specific branch with its own unique history, and the Ogasawara are not Tada Genji. But that's what makes it great to do this compare and contrast, because you can see what things are similar based on it being Genji, and what things are different based on the differences in the sort of the heritage of these different lines of Genji. Now we're also going to look, and so there's that for the war curtains, and then we're going to look at we're going to take a brief note on back to the Kamakura Sagyo, because I mentioned that in a previous video, but there's some things I want to say about it that I didn't include in the original video. So let's dive right into that war curtain bit by looking directly at the Gunpo Jiyoshu. I'll present pictures from two different versions, or from two versions, but it's the same material. Alright, so here's a picture of curtain. Now the problem is that in these versions, where the picture of the war curtain lands, it lands right on one of the folds. So if you're unfamiliar, the way that the old manuals are put together is the document is either handwritten or the document is printed, or however it goes, but then it's these sort of folded pages that are bound on the bottom. So sometimes the images end up right on the fold. So what I've done is I've taken one side and I've taken the other side, and I'm stitching them together to try to present it to you as a whole picture. So you'll see, so what I've done is I've put colored arrows, and the arrows are pointing to different things, and then the corresponding things are then at the bottom. So at the top of the curtain, you will see that these are colored tabs, and in the diagram, these tabs are actually labeled different colors, like, white or blue or black or whatever, green, yellow, whatever, da 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 da, right? So as they're labeled, as the tabs up there are labeled, so that's the color that they should be. And then the pink arrow is pointing to the Monomi, the viewing port. Remember what I said, the curtains can either have 7 or 9 holes, viewing holes that are called Monomi, and the top and it's the top 2 are the sun and the moon, and then the bottom 7 are the stars of the Big Dipper. And if there's only 7, then the 7 holes are considered the stars of the Big Dipper, but the top 2 are still called sun and moon. In this picture, there's 9 holes. So the top, the pink arrow is pointing to that one, that is the sun, and then the sort of purplish blue arrows pointing to the another top one, that is the moon. So there's the sun on the right and the moon on the left. So that's your sun and moon. And then the yellow is pointing to just one, but those bottom 7, each one of those has a name of a different star. So they are, if you look at the kanji, you can tell, okay, these are different. So these are 7 different stars. And then the green arrow is pointing to the names of the 5 panels. So each of the panels, there's these 5 panels, each has its own name, and the names are listed on the side over there. So this is a more detailed picture of what the flags look like, and the names of the panels, and the names of the specific holes, which this is this star, that is that star, that's the sun, that's the moon, things like that. And so I wanted to present this because in the previous video I mentioned these things, but I didn't have an image at the time that I thought to put up to show that. So hopefully this gives you a better understanding of the symbolism of the curtain. And on this slide is just another picture of the same thing from another copy. You can see that the top tabs are labeled with colors. You have the sun and the moon on the top. You have the 5 panels with their names. You have the 7 star port of view Monomi, each with their star name. So this is the fairly standard 9 Monomi curtain. Basic Genji design. Now before we go on, I just realized there may be some confusion based on what I've put on a previous panel, so let me clarify something. When I say that the Monomi viewing holes have the names of the Big Dipper stars, I mean that within the Tada and the Oe tradition. In the Gunpo Jioshu, or the Ogasawara standard, you have the sun and moon, but the 7 other holes are not named after the Big Dipper stars. They have names of stars, or they use the kanji for star, but it's referring actually to other astrological or astronomic bodies. But in this particular case, it's named after planets. So there's actually something called the 7 planets, or it uses it. In this case, it's referring to them as stars, but it's actually planets and other sort of celestial bodies, so to speak. So in the top 2, so we'll go back to this picture. Now this is the standard Ogasawara one that we just discussed. The top are sun and moon, and I said that the bottom ones have star names, but what I meant by that was that these are the names of planets. The Big Dipper aspect is Tada Genji and Oe Genji. Now we will see the Big Dipper star, the actual Big Dipper stars will pop up on the esoteric Ogasawara version. So what I would like you to understand is that in the standard Ogasawara version, there is 9 holes. That is the sun, the moon, and the 7 planets, or the 7 celestial bodies. That's not the Big Dipper part. It is the Big Dipper part on the Genji, on the Tada Genji or the Oe Genji, but not in the standard Ogasawara. you only see the dipper appear on the esoteric Ogasawara war curtain, but it's always the Big Dippers on the Tada Genji and the Oe Genji version. So hopefully this panel, this slide will clear that up. Now here's where there's a little bit of difference. On the left you see the Gunpo Jioshu has these sort of standard ties or tabs with some instructions on them. But in the Genji tradition, now what you'll see in the Gunpo Jioshu, there's going to actually be a sort of a basic version, and then there's going to be a more esoteric version. We'll get into that one in a minute. But in the Genji tradition, the sort of Tada Oe Genji tradition, there's even the basic ones. You have these the Kuji grid, or the seal of you have the seal of Domon and the seal of Seimei, and you have kanji, which has a sort of magical meaning as well. And these appear on the tabs. So the Gunpo Jioshu does not have the Domon, the Seimei, and all of these other kanji on their tabs. So there's one point of contrast. The Tada Oe tradition has, even on these tabs have more esoterics. How to tie them has the esoteric meaning. So that again, that's a difference from the Ogasawara Genji tradition to the Tada Oe tradition. The Tada Oe tradition has more symbolism and mysticism surrounding the ties on the top, in the sense that it has these seals and they have to be tied in certain directions, etc., etc. Now here's a look at the more esoteric battle curtains, war curtains from the shown in the Gunpo Jioshu. So it does contain a more esoteric version. This version is a little bit more like what the Tada Genji curtain would be. So at the very top, you'll see the Kuji, Rin Pyo To Sha, and this is referring to like the curtain. The entire curtain is considered a Kuji grid, or is considered Kuji. And the different parts, like this pole, this edge, this bit is the different parts of the Kuji. So whereas on the Tada Genji tradition, you actually do put the Kuji grids on the flags in specific places and tie them certain ways. In the esoteric Ogasawara Genji version, it's just the idea is that the different parts of the banner are the different parts of the Kuji, the different Kuji. You will also see now that's in red, the arrow in red, and then the arrow in orange is pointing to the tabs. And in this version, the tabs contain one of the names of a star constellation, and then the green represents or shows different Buddhist seed syllables. And then you have your star names in your viewing holes there. So the next slide is going to show you the other half of this, because this one also, for whatever reason, falls right on the edge where it folds. So over here is the other side. You can see where the Kuji finishes. So the final parts being the 9. You also see the star constellations continuing. You can see where you see sort of different deities listed up there. And then you see the 5 panels are still the same names. The names of the 5 panels are still there, same. You see the Monomi, the viewing holes, but they are this star, this star, this star. And also take note of the shape of the poles, because we're going to mention that just a second. But the poles actually have specific shapes. And then by poles, I mean the sort of the pole or the rod that the curtains are tied to. That has a specific shape, and we'll look at that briefly in another slide. And then just for fun, I wanted to pay attention with a crimson arrow to the dreaded Kuden down there. Kuden, for those of you that don't know, Kuden basically means that there's some kind of additional information, or there's some kind of secret, some family tradition, some secret school tradition, and it's not written in the document. Kuden just means that it's an oral tradition. It's to be passed down by word of mouth. So when you run into Kuden when you're looking at a document, it means like, the document's not going to give you any more information, and so it becomes the dreaded Kuden, because once you hit Kuden, there's no more information for you to get about that particular topic. So now before we move on, let me also remind you that it's only in the Tada Genji version or the Oe Genji version that the Big Dipper it's always the sun, the moon, and the Big Dipper. And I said earlier that the Ogasawara version, the standard version, has the sun, moon, and planets, and you only get the Big Dipper under the esoteric, the very Buddhist Kujikiri version that we just looked at. So, but let me take the moment to point out that in this version of the Ogasawara style curtain, we see the Big Dipper. This version matches the Tada Oe curtains more closely than the previous version, than the standard Ogasawara version. So I've put these red arrows pointing to the 7 Monomi in this one. So these are the 7 Big Dipper stars. And when you only have 7 holes, it's the Big Dipper. Remember, in the Genji tradition, it's always the Big Dipper whether there's 9 or 7. It's either, right? But in other traditions like Ogasawara, if it's 7, and it's a more esoteric version, then it becomes the Dipper. It's the Dipper stars. Now you may say, well, what happens to the sun and moon? If it's 9 is sun and moon and then 7 is the Dipper, what happens when there's just 7? Well, the first and second stars of the Big Dipper constellation are said to be the sun and moon bodhisattvas. So essentially what happens is the sun and the moon get sort of just blended into the totality of the Big Dipper stars. So again, you have to be focused. Which tradition are you focusing on? Within the Tada Genji tradition, it's always, whether there's 9 or 7, it's always the sun, the moon, and the Dipper. But within other traditions, such as the Ogasawara tradition, if there's 9, then it's sun, moon, and 7 planets. It's only the Big Dipper in the esoteric version that only has 7 holes. So it's this is where you really need to know the tradition to know what's being presented. And this slide or this panel is to show you the pages. So I showed you the pages from one copy, and I told you I would show it for you another one. So here I went again, and I've stitched them together. Here you have the esoteric flag with all of it, with everything that's on the other version. So there's nothing different or new on this one, but I'm just showing you another copy so that you can see what this one looks like when it's put together. Now remember when I mentioned the pole or the rod? So here we go. On the left you can see 2 different designs in the Oe Genji text. And then I put a little picture showing you from the esoteric curtain taken from the Gunpo Jyoshu. You can see I took the pole that is Rin from the Kuji, Rin pole, the first one, and you can see that it has the shape of the design that is on the bottom left of your screen. So basically what I'm trying to convey is that these curtains can be very complex, ranging from normal curtains to very esoteric curtains. Variations in the usage and purpose and variation of the tradition can produce several minor or major differences in the curtain. And here we're just visiting back to the original camping video where I showed you a picture of the curtains as it appears in the Oe Genji document. And you can see, how it has the viewing holes, has the 5 panels, has the tabs on top. But this diagram didn't contain any of the more complicated aspects, the Kuji, the colors, the star names, things like that. All of these details were not shown in this picture. It's just explained in the written portion of the text. But because the Gunpo Jyoshu actually does a good job of putting all of that information in visual form, pictures, diagrams, I decided to go with that because one, they're very good representations of the parts of the flag named and things like that. It's really good. And also, like I said, it would give a good opportunity to compare and contrast some between this sort of Ogasawara Genji and this Oe Genji, which and then the Oe Genji jives pretty good with the Tada Genji. So I've sort of grouped Tada Genji and Oe Genji together, and we're comparing and contrasting with this Ogasawara, which is a Seiwa Genji derivative. Um, and again, like I said, the Gunpo Jyosha has really good diagrams, so I thought it would work well. And this slide, we're not going to be on this much. These are just pictures from the different copies of the Gunpo Jyoshu, basically showing different ways of setting up the curtains around operations. Right? You see them sort of uh, the picture is essentially explaining. There's some teaching to go with why you do it this way or why you do it that way, but in the end, visually, what I want to do is give you a good visual representation. Now, in the camping video, of course, we were looking at these curtains being used at a small camp, but in these pictures, of course, there's the idea. The general premise is the same. Okay, so now before this video ends, I want to clarify something that I said earlier in the previous video. I talked about Kamakura Sagyo, and I mentioned that it was 5 shaku. But what I should have been more careful with my words. What I meant was that it is a maximum length of 5 shaku. It is 5 shaku or less. So a Kamakura Sagyo at maximum length is 5 shaku. It can be 2 shaku, 3 shaku, 4 shaku, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, as long as it does not go beyond 5 shaku. If it's more than 5 shaku, even by a half shaku, so if it's 5.5 shaku, it's no longer a Kamakura Sagyo. 5 shaku is the absolute max length for a Kamakura Sagyo. And one of the reasons I feel compelled to clarify this is, one, for the sake of making sure that what I'm trying to explain is clear. Kamakura Sagyo, 5 shaku max length. So 5 or under, 5 shaku or under. But also, as some of you are aware, during the 1640s, 1645, I think, 1640s of Japanese history, the Tokugawa shogunate introduced a law that said that duty weapons, meaning weapons used and worn while a samurai is on official shogunate business, official shogun duty. The duty weapons had to conform to specific rules. So, such as it had to be an uchigatana of a particular length, had to be a wakizashi of a particular length, had to have particular colored handle, had to have particular colored scabbard, things like that. And even the sageo length has to be a certain length. Now, the Tokugawa duty weapon sageo length is not that much longer than 5 shaku, but it is definitely longer than 5 shaku. So there is no, it is not possible for the Tokugawa duty weapon sageo length to be confused with Kamakura sageo. But because it is close to being 5 shaku, I don't know, I haven't done the math in my head, but it's close. It's like 5.6 shaku, or it's somewhere between 5 and 6 shaku. So I was afraid some people might think that means it's a Kamakura sagyo because it's like 5.5. But remember, 5 shaku is the absolute maximum length. So the Tokugawa duty weapon is more than 5 shaku. Therefore, the Tokugawa duty weapon cannot possibly be Kamakura Sagyo. Kamakura Sagyos are really short sagyos that are pretty much used just to tie the sword onto things. You can use the sagyo for rope purposes, but it's not a long sagyo. It's a short sagyo. So, and then as I mentioned in the other video, there's a tradition that was cited among Hatakeyama retainers, but it's not just Hatakeyama retainers, but that's where the document cites it. Hatakeyama retainers formed all kinds of stuff using extra long sageo, like really long sageo. But so neither the Kamakura or the Hatakeyama, neither of those are the Tokugawa duty weapon. So Tokugawa duty weapon sageo length is its own thing, its own specific thing. With that also said, well, in the video, I want people to remember that the Tokugawa, the laws, the duty weapon specifications only apply to any weapon that was used for shogunate purposes for a particular time period. So people still could have their own traditional hand-me-down weapons, weapons that may be handed down, or weapons that they will have created for the purpose of their own tradition. So somebody, for example, with a Tada Genji tradition can have Tada Genji spec weapons and equipment, but they would still have to have Tokugawa duty spec weapons. So if you were only able to acquire one set of weapons, if you were falling in the years where these rules were in place, then yeah, unfortunately for you, you've got to get you got to get Shogun spec weapons. But if you were able to acquire weaponry beyond the sort of government required versions, then you could have swords of all kinds, etc., etc. So remember that even though under the Tokugawa shogunate there were rules for what your official duty weapons had to look like, that doesn't mean that you can't have your own traditional weaponry on your own free time. And that's basically what this last panel says. The 1645 law applies only to duty weapons. Family property did not have to match the rules as long as it was not being used for official shogunate duty purposes. You would wear your duty spec weapons when on official business, but you could train and own with weapons. You can own and train with weapons made to your own tradition specs. So the duty swords would have standard specs, but your personal non-duty swords could have Kamakura Sageo, or they could have extra long Sageo. So again, emphasizing the difference between private family tradition and official government policy duty spec weapons. So family tradition versus government rules of the time. So two different things. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations, but please be respectful.